We will now move on to rebuttals. Peter Atkins will now speak for 10 minutes, which is required for Adam Deen's opening statement. Could we please have a round of applause, please?
Thank you very much. I think Adam's presentation was a very engaging mixture of prejudice and pessimism, and I'd like to base my remarks in those two categories. Prejudice. We were told that there was a God, for otherwise nothing would be understandable. Now, immediately you see that an insertion of a position that I think is inappropriate. Where we should begin is by asking whether everything that is reliably known in the world can be explained without invoking the concept of a God. And I think we should start from bare rock in terms of your presumptions. And only as you find that bare rock is insufficiently hospitable for your observations should you build more elaborate constructions on it. Everything that Adam said in terms of the necessity of God was velveting of a rock in that sense. There was nothing that he said, nothing he said was supported by evidence. If you listen carefully, everything was assertion. Nothing at all was based upon observational evidence in the world. It was all based on authority. It was all based on prejudice. And I think you should therefore be very suspicious of someone who invokes such complicated explanations. Pessimism. I mean, pessimism is the lifeblood of philosophy. Pessimism is all about people doubting that human beings have sufficient intellectual power to arrive at explanations. Authority was quoted in the form of Stephen Jay Gould, who said that there are things that we'll never understand. What is the evidence for that? Peter Medawar was another authority quoted, who said, and he's an old man, dead for many years now, that science cannot answer very central questions about the origin of the universe, for example. What is the evidence for that? It's just pessimism in the mind of a philosopher, not accepting the really extraordinary power of scientific investigation. But I was astonished to hear what was effectively a support of creationism and intelligent design in this room. Saying that discovering complexity is a sign of the designer is exactly the argument that was used by William Paley 200 years ago when he stumbled across, saying that if you stumbled across a watch, then you know that it had to be designed. That was in relation to the biosphere. And it was overthrown by evolution and natural selection. But now we're hearing exactly the same thing said about the cosmosphere. Why should we accept it now that we've already seen that it's such an old-fashioned view that indeed was overthrown in one aspect of existence at least? I think that there are deep questions that science has great difficulty with. I think that there is nothing, though, that science cannot actually investigate. If ethics was used as an example of something that cannot be proved scientifically, I'm not sure what proof means in that context, but it is certainly the case that the distinction between good and bad can, I believe, be investigated scientifically. So, for example, you would appeal to ethological studies You would appeal to the evolution of societies, to the evolution of animals to our current state. I think that we actually understand the basis of human behavior in terms of our evolutionary history, but not only our evolutionary history, because psychology comes into it as well, and we have got big enough brains to reflect upon the consequences of our actions. A koala bear probably doesn't reflect upon the consequences of its actions, and it's simply in the grip of its evolutionary history. But we can, and we are not fully in the grip of that history, but it does provide the substrate for our distinction between right and wrong. I think in a funny way, I would agree with some of the things that Adam said were certainly not the case. In the sense that I agree that you can't prove that mathematics is consistent. I mean, he was alluding there to Gödel's theorem. And I think that has an extraordinary implication for science, that we don't know quite what the implications are for that, since mathematics is so deeply based upon mathematical exposition. But I'm not sure that I agree with him when he says that science will never distinguish between the real and the unreal. I actually do think that we're probably unreal here for very deep reasons, which only science will in due course elucidate. But really, the basis of my disagreement with Adam's presentation is that it was wholly devoid of evidence for his assertions in his initial part of the speech when he was talking about some conflict between science and religion. There is no need, in my view, for a God to be the substrate of rationality. I mean, that's simply an assertion using words. There is no evidence for it whatsoever. And I also think that he is deeply pessimistic and rather dismissive of the ability of the scientific method, which is not quite the same as science. I mean, the scientific method is a very simple process of doing observations that you can rely on under controlled conditions and making sure that they're reliable, and then discussing them within the network of other ideas and sharing them objectively with other people and putting them up to worldwide scrutiny. It's an amazing method. It's an extraordinary method. It's a very honest method. And I don't see that method of investigation and objective sharing of those observations and fitting them into a reticulation of knowledge cannot be applied to absolutely every aspect of human existence. I am proud to be a scientistic person and also a naturalistic person. I think science is showing that it can indeed elucidate everything, not necessarily prove everything, not necessarily predict everything, but can certainly investigate everything. And it does not find a God wherever it looks. And I'm optimistic for its future. Every scientist is optimistic, and every scientist has every right to be optimistic. Look at the success so far.
And now I can give these 10 minutes to rebuttal. Can you hear me back?
In the name of Allah, most gracious, most merciful. So, if you recall in my opening speech, I said that I would be arguing that the proposition that science and theism are incompatible is false. I didn't really see any arguments against that proposition. I think it still holds this evening that science and theism is still compatible. I also argue that the evidence can be used to support theism. The scientific evidence can be used to support theism. Now, a few comments. Pessimism. I find this not to be a very persuasive argument. Why? Because, in a sense, it's a bit like, let's say, wishful thinking. It's like speaking to a religious person, and when you ask him for proof, and he says, "You'll know when you die. You'll know when you die." But the point is, where is the evidence? Now, Professor Atkins has said I didn't present any evidence, just assertions. But that is itself is just an assertion without any evidence, because I obviously did. I gave arguments on why the universe has a cosmic origin. I gave arguments to describe the initial conditions of the universe. I also gave an argument to show that scientism, this idea, this article of faith of hardcore atheists, or heavy, was it weak or heavy atheists? Weak and strong, rather, yeah. Strong atheists, it's this article of faith that they hold on to. And I'd say that itself is based on wishful thinking. Now, what I'd like to do now is just look at some of the points that he made with respect to the claim that we will have answers. In the beginning of his presentation, he spoke about 4 points, about explaining how something can come from nothing. Well, this I find really hard to appreciate, because when we talk about something coming from nothing, and I think he's referring to physics explaining this is impossible for physics to explain this. Why? Because physics only works within one physical state to another physical state, with a background of law. When we talk about the origin of the universe, we're saying that it literally came from nothing. No physical state, no law, absolutely nothing. Or we can say an absence of anything, to be accurate. It's beyond physics. Once we assert that the origin of the universe is true, then the question arises, what caused the universe? Physics alone cannot answer this question, because, by definition, the universe is a closed system, and it began to exist. This is a philosophical question, and this is grounded in the idea that whatever begins to exist needs a cause. This itself is an evidence. Why is this an evidence? Because to deny it would lead to absurdities. You disagree? For example, if we deny this principle, this metaphysical principle, that means that anything and everything can just pop into existence, uncaused. Just like the universe. If the universe, the entire universe, was come into existence, uncaused, so could anything. A chair, an elephant, a traffic cone on Professor Atkins' head, anything and everything could just come into existence. And can I just add that this principle is universally verified and supported by science itself. So it is the highest level of evidence, the likes of someone like Professor Atkins, who's a scientist. So it is grounded, the idea that there is a transcendent cause is grounded in two views. That whatever begins to exist needs a cause, which we cannot deny, unless we accept hocus pocus. And that the universe does actually have a cosmic origin. Second point, that there is intelligence behind the universe. And we have good reasons to believe that the initial conditions of the universe were fine-tuned. What can we say about this? Here, Professor Atkins mocks this argument of specified complexity. He said that this is, again, Haley's argument of design. But this is a misplaced objection. Why? Because The initial conditions of the universe show us that there is no evolution. There is no evolution of the universe. It just comes into existence, and then it is fine-tuned. So it's not the same argument here. Yes, if there was an evolution of universes, then one could suggest that the fine-tuning is nothing to be surprised about. Here, he is asserting, without any evidence, of what some scientists speak of, which is called the multiverse. But I have a few things to say about that. Now, firstly, this idea of the multiverse. This idea of the multiverse is no more scientific than the hypothesis of a cosmic design. No more scientific. The eminent physicist John Polkinghorne says, people try to trick out of many universe accounts in short of pseudo-scientific terms, but that is pseudoscience. It is a metaphysical guess that there might be many universes with different laws and circumstances. Now, so firstly, we have to understand what this discussion is about. This is not science, this is metaphysics. Now, but does this allow us to undermine the design, the specified complexity, the idea of a multiverse? Does it really? I don't think so. What it does, it takes the problem of design and puts it up one level higher. It passes the buck. It's an annoying bump in the carpet. You push it down somewhere, and it comes out somewhere else. You can't get rid of it. For example, it is often said that the multiverse can be accounted for if we appeal to inflationary models. But inflation itself requires fine-tuning. Robert Brandenberger from Brown University writes, the field which drives inflation is expected to generate an unexpectedly large cosmological constant, which must be tuned to zero by hand. This is a problem which plagues all inflationary models. So, even to postulate the multiverse, you cannot run away from design. It's going to catch up with you. So you have a multiverse that explains the fine-tuning, and then how does this mother universe generate these other universes? It has to be fine-tuned itself. But what is the other point about this? If we postulate a multiverse, what that means is that there is no principled way in making a distinction between design and randomness. Randomness. That means everything and anything can be explained by chance. Now, you often hear atheists charging theists and saying, God of the gaps argument. But this is nothing more than chance of the gaps. There is no principled way. That means there is a non-zero probability of every logical thing existing. Non-zero probability of every logical thing existing. So that would mean that if you're playing poker with one of your friends, hopefully with no money, so you have something to say, and he wins 10 games in a row with the same winning hand, and you say, you're cheating. He says, no, I'm in one of those universes, of those infinite universes, and I just by luck. No one's going to accept that. Another problem with this view is that there's no independent evidence. No independent evidence whatsoever to support the existence of a multiverse. Say, for example, you come across a wacky scientist, and he puts out the idea of something he calls the Fairy theory of gravity. Fairy theory of gravity. And he says the reason we don't float out into space is because there are these invisible tiny fairies. And what they do, they push everything down on the Earth. And that is why we don't float out into space. Now that is an explanation for gravity, right? Why would we accept that? Along with other reasons. Because there's no independent evidence for the existence of tiny little fairies. Tiny little fairies. That's why we wouldn't accept that. In the same way, yes, a multiverse may potentially, and I've shown that it won't, but let's just argue and say it would, account for the data for the fine-tuning of the universe. But there's no evidence to support it whatsoever. However, is there evidence to support the hypothesis of a cosmic designer? Absolutely. Because we know how intelligent beings act and what kind of traces they leave behind. We know how intelligence works. Specified complexity, for example. And also there are other arguments for the existence of God. For example, the moral argument. My time's up.
answer session. Each speaker will have a chance to respond. If the questioner could please pose their question to a specific